In this short talk episode, I speak to Eric Recker about strategies for optimal thinking. He defines the win the now as a present mindset, focusing on current moments instead of past and future. In this conversation, there are 6 key takeaways, whilst Eric stresses the prevalence and dangers of burnout. Listen up to the whole conversation. I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Eric Recker. How are you doing, Eric?
I am doing great. How are you?
I am really cool. Eric, do you have a favourite place?
A favorite place anywhere in the world?
Yeah.
Okay. I love Park City, Utah. It is a place that my wife and I love to go vacation. I love to do anything outside. So we hike in the summer, in the winter, we ski. Just being outside in nature, in the mountains, in creation. I just love it.
There is something about nature that's really magical, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like anytime when my head is really spinning and I have too much going on, anytime I can get outside and be in nature, it is such a great reset for me.
Yeah, there's that experiment that they did where they found they wanted to see how quick could we be sort of like powered up, refreshed, grounded by just putting our bare feet into the ground. And they discovered it was so fast that they couldn't really measure it. So like so no matter how depleted you are, just putting your bare feet onto the ground completely refreshed and recalibrated the body. I thought that was absolutely amazing.
Boy, that is a lot of what I speak on, and I'm not familiar with that study. So thanks for giving me a project to do after we're done here.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Okay, so tell us a bit more about you.
Yeah, so by trade, I'm a practicing dentist. So I see patients 3 days a week in my practice. And through a series of seasons of burnout, I decided that there was more to life than just being a dentist for the rest of my life. So I was working full time, 4 to 5 days a week. And now I've started doing some coaching and speaking, keynote speaking and workshops on burnout, on living life present, on becoming your best version, and ironically refueling, because you already mentioned that. So those are some of the things that I'm doing in this part of my life. I really want to be able to leave an impact, and I really want to help other people on their journey. So that's why the slight pivot, so that I'm able to still see patients and run my practice, and I'm able to make an impact in different ways as well.
Brilliant. And I know that you've got a thing called like win the now. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I call win the now the mindset of presence. So I think one thing that happens to a lot of us who are high achievers is that we are either stuck in the past or worried about the future. And so we miss out on the one thing that's guaranteed, and that's the now, the moment that's right in front of us. So what Win the Now says is we figure out what the different nows are in our life. For me, it's when I'm in my dental practice, it's breaking it down into patient interactions, maybe a short interaction. And then what does a win look like in those moments? Maybe it's a good patient interaction. Maybe it's we got a procedure done and it was comfortable for the patient. When I'm at home, win can look like having a great meal with my family where we were all present sitting around the table. When I'm doing a podcast, it's a good conversation between the two of us, adding value to your listeners and being able to connect well. And so once in a while, we will take a loss. There will be maybe a podcast recording doesn't go how we want it to. Maybe there's technical issues. Maybe there's a struggle with the patient. But what Win the Now reminds us is that there is another now right around the corner. So we need to get right back into the present moment and try to find more wins, both for us and for the people around us.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. So do you have any strategies then for optimal thinking?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we have largely lost with all of our distractions is the ability to be quiet, the ability to actually sit in quiet and let our brain pause, to let our brain process. So we're so quick when we feel any discomfort, when we feel any angst, that we just pick up our digital pacifiers, our phones. And much like we give little kids a pacifier when they're fussy and upset, when we're as adults fussy and upset, we just pick up our devices. So I think we've lost that margin in our lives where our brain was able to be quiet. Maybe we were at a traffic light and we had 2 minutes while we had to wait for it to turn green. And we would just sit in that moment. Now we're quick to get our phones out. So I think what we've really lost is that idle space for our brains. And because our brains are always stimulated, I think it affects the ways that we think. And so I think it's really important. That's one of my biggest strategies, is that we find ways to introduce quiet back into our lives.
Yeah, I think you've got a really good point. It's because there isn't any quiet spaces. I mean, even if you're going out with somebody and they've popped to the toilet, you would just look around and see what people are doing. Whereas now it's kind of like, oh, that gives me a good reason to reach out to my phone.
Exactly. Exactly. And I wish that it was a little harder to unlock our phones so that it would cause us to not always do that. But one thing that I have tried to do, I'm not always successful with it, but one thing I've tried to do with my phone is, when it's in my pocket, making myself ask one question before I pick it up. And that question is, why am I picking this up? And if I can give a good answer for why I'm doing that, then I pick it up. And if I can't, then is that one of those moments I can take to just observe the world that I'm in, instead of just going down a rabbit hole and all of a sudden I'm into politics and news and all of those things that make me anxious, instead of the calm that my brain really needs.
I think you've made a really good point there about the fact that you can get quite anxious just by watching the news. And maybe it's not the news that makes you anxious. It's the constant um, dramatization of what's in the news. And that, it's not as if you can, back in the day where you got like the news were at a certain, like maybe once an hour, or, the main news would be in the evening and everybody would wait till then. Whereas now it's because you have to try and fit a constant 24/7 cycle. It's not necessarily news that you're getting, is it? It's some dramatization to keep you watching, and that can become quite stressful in itself.
I think you are absolutely right. The app designers and the social media designers, they know what they're doing. The economy is our attention. So they will do anything they can to hold our attention. And our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and they know that. And so it's on to the next video, and you watch one video and all of a sudden you've watched 100 videos. And then you look at one site and it leads you to another site from a pop-up, and another site and another site and another site. And so I think we need to be really careful that we're allowing ourselves to be victims in the midst of all of that.
Absolutely. Okay, so is there any other type of strategies you think that we could use?
So one of the things that I really like to do is have people think about what the different nows are in their life. So someone who has a corporate job probably has a lot of meetings, a lot of time trying to work through email and maybe some projects that they have to do. So figuring out what those different nows look like, and then what a win looks like in each of those times. And so that when you are in a meeting, you're not thinking about your email. When you're doing email, you're not thinking about the previous meeting. So whether it's with people or whether it's just yourself, to help you get really present in that moment. And then the biggest thing that I noticed about myself, when I would come home at the end of the day and my wife would ask me, "Hey, how was your day?" I would be quick to say, well, this happened, or this bad thing happened. And I would be focused more on the negative parts of my day instead of the wins that I got. And when I've changed my mindset to start to think about wins instead of just losses, then I'm much more likely to come home at the end of the day and share the things that were positive instead of leaning on those things that were negative. So that is one thing. One more thing that I would say that's made a huge difference for me is just the simple concept of time blocking. I think our time can get away from us if we don't plan what we're going to do with our time, and especially all the distractions that we have. So time blocking is another way. So from let's say 9 to 9:30, that's when we're doing this podcast. I know that's what I'm doing. That time is figured out. And then after that, I have some other time blocks set up for the rest of the day to try to have a productive day. But I also find that I don't need as much time to get all my tasks done if I have it blocked and I have given myself the gift of what I'm doing in each one of those time blocks.
Yeah, because there's a research that shows that when you think you're multitasking, you're not actually multitasking, because when they've looked into your brain, you are stopping and starting. So you're actually, and the time it takes to reset your brain from one activity to another is actually, you're losing quite substantial amounts of time as the day goes on.
Yeah, it's very true. I've heard it said that the lie of multitasking is that you are actually doing it.
Yeah. All right then. So, is there a way then to overcome fear, especially as the world is changing so often? So my thoughts is like, somebody who's change eager. I like change, generally speaking. Um, but I also recognize, as someone who does a lot of change leadership, that that as a default state isn't all that common. So people do fear the fact that things are changing quite fast. And if we look at the world today, it's having rapid change and quite substantial change. So is there a way that people can overcome that fear of the world changing so much?
Yeah, that's a great thought. I think that one of the things that we can do to help with that is that we focus on the things that we can control. Because I think a lot of the fear of change comes because we think we are out of control. We think there's nothing we can do about it, that we are just on this path, the world is going to heck, and there's nothing that we can do about it. When in reality, there are things that we can control. And if we can't control them, we can influence them. So we can focus on our preparation. We can focus on how we show up. We can focus on gratitude instead of only being, I think gratitude is a superpower that's often overlooked. Instead of just being worried and fearful about change, we can think of some of the blessings that we have in our life. We can think about the things that we have that we are thankful for and make lists on that. So one thing that I have found, and I think the research backs this up, is that fear and gratitude cannot exist in the same space. Worry, anxiety, and gratitude cannot exist in the same space. So I think that when we feel that fear rising up, one of the things that we can do to push that back a little bit is to focus on gratitude, focus on what we do have in our lives, how far we've come. Maybe even think about those things that we were fearful of in the past that didn't actually come true. Because if we fear 100 things, 94 of those things are not going to happen. And 6% of those things are probably going to happen to a less severe rate than what we thought they were going to. So fear is this big giant animal that usually turns out to not be as big as what we thought it was going to be.
Well, thank you for that. I like the idea that, the positive and the negative can't exist at the same space. So is that still the same when you're thinking about anxiety? So when I've when I know people that are highly anxious, they often say they can't think of the positive because the anxiety is not quite the same as in some respects, when it's frightened of something, they're able to be more rational about it and sort of think their way past it. But somehow the anxiety seems to come over like a wave and they're unable to think past anxiety. Is there a different way or just a better way to be able to ride that storm?
Yeah, anxiety is tough. Anxiety is a big animal, and I think we are becoming a much more anxious society. And I'm not a mental health professional, so the things that I talk about are just from things that worked for me. And I used to have crippling anxiety on Sunday evenings heading into Monday mornings. I would have whole Sunday nights that I didn't sleep because I was so worried about work. I was so worried about what was next. I would lay awake thinking about things the whole night. And that was before I knew many of these things. So again, I focused on the things that I could control. And one huge realization that I had that made a huge difference in my anxiety was that I could, in fact, not be everything to everybody. Being a business owner, having a team of almost 20, I felt like I had to be everything to everybody and to all my patients and have all the answers and always be on. And that created an intense amount of anxiety. So I think part of it is getting at the root cause of what is some of that anxiety coming from. But yeah, I think that even though it's tough when the anxiety is coming, if you can think about gratitude, that is huge. If you can get out and move, if you can exercise, if you can just have some of your favorite things that you can do to distract yourself from the anxiety, sometimes you just have to physically step away from it. I think what we do with anxiety is once it hits, we kind of hunker down. So we retreat into ourselves, and it's quite possible to have a feel sorry for ourselves party about the anxiety, because I know, because I've done that. But seeing what are the things we can do? Can we change our environment? Can we make an exhaustive gratitude list? Even how many things can we possibly think about that we're grateful for? And I find that for me, eventually that anxiety dulls, and it's not nearly as big of a hold on me when I try some of those things.
Thank you. I think that's really, really helpful because not everybody wants to reach out to medication. And one of the things, like I say, is like, a panicked mind cannot think. So you have to kind of release that panic. Otherwise, you just can't think past that solution.
That is so true. A panicked mind cannot think, but we can use that panicked mind even a little bit. So we can try to, even though it can't think, we can distract it into something that brings us joy. That's where I think if our mind is bothering us, then can we do something with our body, our physical body, to try to mess with that pattern?
Makes sense. All right. So before we end the conversation for today, is there anything that you'd want to share with the audience or add?
Yeah. So I think that burnout is something that a lot of us struggle with. It's certainly something that I've struggled with over the years. I've actually had 3 pretty serious rounds of burnout in my life where I got to the point of panic attacks, chest pains, heart palpitations, all of those kind of things. And so one of the things I've wanted to do in my keynotes and workshops that I do for people is to help them recognize the signs of burnout and help them push it back a little bit. So I developed a 5 days to knock back burnout challenge on my website, and it's free of charge. And all it is a series of emails that if you think you might be burned out, if you think you're feeling overwhelmed, this is a good, solid tool that you can use to learn a few things to maybe release its hold a little bit. Because burnout is scary, and most of us who are high achievers, I believe that almost all of us face it at some time. We either face it or we're lying to ourselves about whether we're facing it. So I think it's, I'm not sure for you in the UK, but in the US, burnout is a massive problem. So I just want people to know that they're not alone. If they're feeling that, it's actually extremely common, but there is hope, and there are things that can be done.
Yeah, and it's funny enough, I was talking about this burnout thing with somebody yesterday, and it was like when everybody went home, people was working too many hours, and then they were told by the organizations, you need to relax, don't work too hard. And then there was that lull period where people seem to manage to get that balance. But somehow with people moving from fully remote, where they finally reached that point of balance between work and home life, gone to hybrid, and then that balance is being knocked out again. And so people are now working longer hours and reaching that burnout point now, which is such a shame, because we did actually reach a point where life was more in balance with work.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think it was, I think there's advantages of being in the workplace and advantages of being at home, and lots of advantages of a hybrid model where there's some of each. But I think the important thing is that we have to have these conversations. I know that it's typically been sort of a taboo topic to talk about these things in workplaces, but I think we need to have open, honest discussions with our people about burnout, about mental health, because if you have a workforce that is mentally healthy, they are going to be more productive. That's just how it works. So I think it's important that that coworkers have these conversations with each other and support each other. I think it's important that managers and leaders are willing to have people come in and talk about burnout in their organizations and strategies to move forward from it, because it's something we all face. And if we don't actually look at it and face it, then we're just going to go further down that road where our health is compromised.
That's very true. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Eric.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time.
Yeah, it's been great having you on. And thank you out there for tuning to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I am Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you have enjoyed today's conversation. As a leader, you know that having a strong level of influence is essential to achieving your goals. But how do you know if you're truly making an impact? Take the How Influential Are You scorecard to get a clear picture of your current level of influence and identify areas for improvement. With personalised recommendations and valuable strategies, you'll be able to amplify your influence and make a real difference as a leader. Don't miss this opportunity to improve your leadership skills. Take the scorecard now at amplifyyourinfluence.scoreapp.com.